All right, might just get started. I think we're just about on time here. So my name is Kurt Solarte. I'm with IBM. I came from our Agile practice in the U.S. after spending some time in our Agile practice in the U.K. and Sweden. And I live and work in Sydney now. So this is not so this isn't one of the I guess guru speeches. I'm not really gonna lay down a whole bunch of incredible knowledge for you, but I'm gonna walk you through just kind of some stuff that we do, or definitely that myself and my practice do. This is a case study of one of our Sydney clients. In all honesty, it didn't make it through legal, so it's a blinded case study, so you're not going to see the client's name. So I do have some shots of some screen caps and things, and you'll see some things blacked out, and that's why. But in essence, what we have here is just we're going to walk the case study. I'm pretty informal. At any point, shout out. This is very academic. I suppose you could raise your hands, but just shout out. And basically, my goal is to kind of lay out the problem, the solution, and kind of what the results were, and all along the way, open discussion. So that's kind of the idea. Someone had a very fancy automation of my slides. So I'm going to start with the description of the team and the environment. So just who the team at the client was we were helping, the environment they were living in, and why they were trying to look for change. I'll go through a description of the principles and processes that myself and my team kind of pushed on them a bit, but definitely they were looking to adopt. Then I'm going to touch on just the benefits achieved. So one of the great things about this client was that they were very into metrics, and so they had a lot of metrics on how they were performing, and they kept those throughout the sprints that we ran, and so we could kind of start to see improvement. So it was very nice, measurable benefits that we could take back to the business owners, especially those who were reluctant to come along on the journey with us. And I'll show you some kind of just like I think I have like 4 screen caps in there of just what that actually looks like in the tool as we built the method into the tool. So the team is they do data objects. So they do business intelligence reporting, right? So they do reporting against a big data warehouse across basically everything it is the client does for the business. And this particular, I'll call them a team, although really it's a group of several teams, because basically they process and analyze like requests for new reports or changes to existing reports. They manage all the front end and the report design, but they also do all the ETLs, changing the data cubes, and flushing everything out with the data warehouse. So pretty different teams actually across them. The front end designers tend to know some about the data, but they're not probably as heavily tech into the data warehouse as the data guys. So there's often a little bit of let's say rivalry, spirited rivalry between those groups, and they are spread across multiple sites. So Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland, Wellington are the 4 main sites. They had some work at home people and some other sites around, but mainly we were working in those 4. And then the team also obviously had management, whose responsibility really was to attempt to prioritize the work. So they do these reports for the whole business, and so they come in. These report requests come in, or changes to existing reports come in from across the whole business, and management's supposed to try to figure that out, prioritize it, keep it flowing. Monitor the doneness, right? Decide when they're going to roll these reports out. Often, as they put it, deal with the backlash that comes back when they roll it out and the business didn't like it. And then, of course, status, right? Keep everyone up to date on where the money's going, how it's being spent. So the actual customers to this team, right? It was the business line managers, right? And so what do the line managers do? They're managing the profitability and financials of the different product lines within this customer, right? So and they have the responsibility for personnel and efficiencies of their team, planning and budgeting. So they've got reports across all of these types of things, right? So it's I guess what you'd expect out of a business a company that's using business intelligence wisely is that they're grabbing metrics from all over, and anyone within this organization, any of these management lines can kind of request for these different reports and see data cut different ways so they can try to run their business based on metrics and analytics. Then finance and audit. So those guys definitely always wanted reports for obvious reasons. So and then anytime we talk about there were some, of course, audit failures, and so we needed to have reports that followed the remediation plans of audits. Those guys are distributed mainly across 2 cities, so mainly Wellington and Sydney, and but they did have 5 buildings also. So, So the original environment. So the team was slave to many masters. Like that was definite, right? The report requests come in from anyone. Anyone can kind of decide on budget. Each of those teams have their own budget. So they could kind of come in with a big chunk of money and start yelling they wanted their reports fast. They had what they called the biggest fish prioritization. So sometimes it was whoever would come in with the most amount of money to transfer in, or whoever was linked to the exec they thought was most important, or as the joke went inside the team, whoever was willing to CC the highest person in the organization on the email request. That was who bubbled to the top. And so they would kind of scope those out. They would fund them from a single place, and then they would start it in a very waterfall fashion, like go start that project, which also meant they had a real inability to change. So it was like scoped and funded, and then they just kind of like turned off thinking about stuff until it was done, and then they would think about something new. The dev managers were really frustrated when we got there because they spent a lot of time on hours and status. So because each person threw money at them and budgeted them from a different spot, they wanted the spend tracked in a different way. And these dev managers had to track that across, like I said, the front end guys in one city and the database guys in another city and ETL layer guys in another city, and it was a lot of work. And really they spent a lot of time doing that. And then really the inability to plan the different types of work. So the 2 main kinds of work that they had coming in were what they would consider like visionary work. So they knew that they were going to the organization was going to change. It was in the works for 2 or 3 quarters in advance. It was planned. And then the reactionary work. Someone found a defect in a report, so defect in production code, or a market shift or an audit failure that meant you drop everything and get the reports changed. So they had a real inability to manage those 2 types of work because of the way they were taking work in and handling work. So the principles and processes we decided to take in, right? Get lean, get agile. So the concept, these are the kind of the main concepts we pull in. We wanted to do more of a pull method because really what it was a push method. People came and slammed work on top of them and they were very reactive. So and it came from everywhere. So we wanted, obviously, the concept of like a backlog, a place where this team could pull their work. We wanted to limit work in progress. And so that we could, and for that, I really like to do that to push decision making. So the problem was that, like I said, you'd copy someone even higher, you'd come with a bigger budget, and they'd leave things kind of at an in-progress status. And so we found the old pieces of project that had been in progress for 18 months. No one knew where it was or how it was working. So we wanted to kind of limit the work in progress, and then we needed unified task board and dashboard. So that one, that principle kind of came in later down the line. We started off very physical and on the wall with our boards and our Kanban board, but the teams were distributed, and we couldn't keep the Kanban boards really in sync. And as we started to get better and work faster, we started to have a lot of stories and a lot of tasks that we couldn't really physically handle on the wall. So we put in the kind of concept of the unified task board. We did use some Scrum principles. Some of the big planned work definitely had this concept of a quarterly release. So they had some organizational concepts around quarterly release, and so we wanted to be able to meet with those quarterly releases and do kind of sprints inside of those quarterly releases, so that we married up with some of the other infrastructure changes and things that were going on inside the organization. So we did bring in some time boxing for a couple of the teams. And then really the retrospective. So the other thing I really like about time boxing, even for the guys that have gotten to now running purely lean, we still kind of in our heads do a time box quarterly to say, let's do a retrospective to see how we're doing, what are we going to change about the process and how we're going. So this is kind of how we did the new process, right? So we started with building backlogs. So we wanted this pull concept. A single backlog didn't work for us. So really what we did was we did a 3-tiered backlog. So we have something that we call the team backlog. Let's say if you're doing, by the book Scrum, that would be maybe your product backlog. And so everything goes in there. If you want it considered, it's got to go in there. Even if you're really, really important and you're going to get pushed to the top, you got to go in there. There's no, we've really gotten to the point where we've enforced if it's not in the backlog, it doesn't get onto anyone's. We don't scope it, we don't do anything with it, so it's on the backlog. And the team backlog. Then from there, we went to a release backlog. That's something that at IBM we do in our agility at scale and disciplined agile delivery, is that we have this concept of 3-tier, because as products and projects get a lot bigger, we've just found that it's easier for everyone's head if we can chunk the backlogs up. So we moved that stuff. We have, like I said, we have this concept of this big quarter. Let's think about the quarter, people funding the quarter. A lot of reasons that in this company we wanted to do it in the quarter. So we got these product backlogs, the team backlog. We pull stuff out by the quarter and put it in the release backlog. And then from the release backlog, we pull it down into the individual sprints and pull it into the sprint backlogs. Stuff can obviously move back into other backlogs as scope and things change, but that's kind of how we think about it. And then it also kind of helps us move things in, maybe push it only into another release, back into the release backlog. So maybe it won't make this sprint, but we still really, really want it in the quarter. Or as we prioritize every week, we can say, oh, actually, this is so low now, it goes all the way back into the team backlog, and it's prioritized again there. It's not going to be part of, you won't see it at all during this quarter, whether you're on the quarterly release or the weekly or the 2 weekly releases. And then the kind of the objects inside the backlog that we use, epics and stories. So those were used a lot for the visioned work. So something that we knew that was coming down the pipe, it's coming out of the team backlog. It's been in the plan for a while, and it's usually well developed. We're also using some requirements management tools there. So those things are kind of new dev, and so those stories will have links back into requirements management tools, and they'll have some serious business analysis around them. They're not very reactive, let's say, right? They're pretty planned. And then defects are basically what we use for the reactive work, and tasks. So most of the reactive work is either a real defect of a problem with something in production, or a change that has to happen fast, either for an audit failure or what they call market change. Yep, so achieve benefits and the views of the dashboards. So, well, before I move on there, so is there any kind of questions, I guess, about the backlogs and how they work? I mean, I guess in reality it's not rocket science, but
how do you sell it?
That's
because, you've got to, we've got agile content development, but to take it to kind of
yeah. So this is how we. So the hardest ones to sell it were the big guys who always got their stuff prioritized top. They don't want to get in line with everyone else.
Yeah.
So the organizationally, what we did was we kind of got a bunch of the little guys to team up and beat up the bigger guys. So what we said was we did get a lot of the heads of technology in a spot together, and we said, here's why. Look at all of these guys. Their work is really it's a crapshoot if their work gets done or not. And here's the guys that get everything done all the time. I don't really think we can continue to work like this, right? So I mean, obviously they had because we're a consulting firm engaged in, they obviously had an issue, right? So they knew they had an issue. We weren't quite sure what it was. So there was some motivation to change, right? They in their heads they knew they had to change something, but on the individual levels they didn't. Some wanted to change, some didn't. But that's basically kind of the root of how we did it. Let's say, all right, well, here's all the guys that just aren't getting treated well. How do we make this a little more fair? And how do we make sure we're doing this for what makes sense for the business, right? Because and so, and that was let's say a several-month process just to get them in agreements there. And then it was probably 6 months of tough enforcement. Because eventually we got everyone in those rooms to say yeah, shake their heads, but people still try to get around the backlog, right? I mean, down to calling the guy they wrote the last report for them and say you just slip this in, right? I mean, those types of things. I would bet still are happening.
I have never happened.
Yeah, that never happens, right? So, I mean, there's no process that's going to change people's motivation, I suppose, 100%, but that's kind of how we sold it. So we took the losers and tried to get them to gang up on the rest, and that started to work well.
Can I just expand on your prioritization process? This is virtual planning, what principles you took into prioritizing and what you mean by virtual planning?
Yeah, so the virtual plan sessions, they're virtual mostly because the teams are distributed, so we couldn't sit everyone in a room to do it. The dev managers typically all get together in a room and are on a conference call. They're playing with video conferencing now. I don't know if it's really, I don't know if I'd really say it's having a big impact over a regular conference call and a screen share tool, but they seem to like video conferencing. So they're conferencing the different people, and so I'll say that they're putting more methods of that madness now as it's moving on to 18 months in. At first, it was maybe controlled chaos, a lot of shouting, a lot of this goes here because of this. At the end of the day, we did have to engage higher management to kind of start to set some priorities. And what they did was they start high with the vision to work. So start high with, here's some organizational changes we have. We know these have to get in. These have to get in a quarter. So you can move the prioritization around as you want in the sprints and inside a monthly, but don't tell me it's not going to be done by the end of the quarter. So that starts with some level of prioritization there. And then we get at urgency in. So we had things like business value. So we built out essentially a couple of columns. There was business value. There was funding available, because sometimes people put stuff in there without funding. So business value, funding available, urgency. So some things are very, very high value, but the urgency we find was actually fairly low. It could come on the last day of the quarter, as long as it's in before next quarter. Those are the three big ones we started with. And each time we went through that, for the first, I'd say, few planning sprints, all the retrospectives were about planning. Like, everyone had an idea of how they tweaked the planning. So I found that, after this engagement, I found that to be really good, to have the retrospectives focus on the planning. I found that in technology, we can run really well in this environment, especially on younger teams. We have a lot of fun with it, but if you get the planning wrong, then you're just kind of running at nothing. So I would do retrospectives, and people will come up, they know their business well, and better than definitely a consultant, a technology consultant coming in would know their business. So they'll kind of start having ideas, well, what about, this should be a factor in how we prioritizing. So now I think there's like 6 or 7 columns in the prioritization sheet. And so we try to get scientific, let's say, in it, right? So there is 3 or 4 options in each of those columns, and they talk about, all right, and then basically there's a point value underneath it in the spreadsheet. And so in the end, it kind of it ranks them, and then there's what we call the fudge factor. Then there's some movement around, so you can add 2 or 3 extra points for something because there's still organizational fudge factors. Yeah, issues. Yeah. Yep. Anything else about that? All right. So these are the benefits that the customers of the technology group really saw to it, right? So they became part of the planning. So again, I'll say for the majority of people, there were only a limited few of the top tier people that got to do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. So for everyone else, they became part of the planning. They got input, right? Because they did really have a feeling that they would log these requests. And often the requests are logged via email. So they would send something off, and maybe one day they'd get an email back that said it had been done, and maybe they'd never hear back. And really then what it also did was, I'd say for the people that would push people around a lot, it helped to show them the impact, right? So if you demand this happens, you realize all these other things shift, right? You know these people personally. You're shifting something out onto these people. So I find that like anything, I suppose, giving a face to who you're beating up helps. So they all understand kind of where the ranking is, and it's just the understanding of what's going on. And like politicking or horse trading, as we call it, still goes on without a doubt, but now it's all out in the open, right? So now it's not 2 guys working something out by the cooler, sending an email to a developer and getting the priority change. Now it's hey, all right, I'll wait 2 quarters for that if you'll make sure I can get this in. They do it there, and so that's kind of where the fudge factor comes in. So we'll rank everything, and then if 2 guys that are on top and bottom want to switch each other, you know, in technology, what do we care? We just want to prioritize lists. We have started to insert the technology team more into the planning too, because obviously there are some things, especially around how they build some of the data cubes so I'm not a big data analytics guy, but some things about how they build the cubes makes sense to build in a certain order. So now we've got a bit of a technology factor on that spreadsheet that says, you know, these two are tightly coupled, or, you know, this one's going to need much longer architecture time. So some stuff that we can insert some prioritization from the technology side. And then really it kind of worked towards them truly being able to, you know, I'll say be agile, because the lower teams were having trouble really changing at all, right? So once they could finally get a response from that request, and then they were locked in with this project, that was it. Like, any change meant that they might not get anything, so they wouldn't change at all. And then they would get these things that were only, you know, 50, 60, 70% of what they needed when they finally got it, but they weren't really able to change midstream. So then for the actual team themselves, again, like a true understanding, and for a lot of the techies, they felt that it gave them a bit of political cover, right? So because they were being approached directly by sometimes senior management and asking them to kind of just do this for me quickly and leapfrog. We had some guys that were kind of working really crazy hours, or would get really, they had anxiety about, you know, well, should I do that, or, you know, how are things prioritized? So this puts everything out in the open, really helped these guys kind of feel a little better about how they worked and prioritized things. And then it helped the dev managers plan across all of those teams better. So because we have a perfectly ranked list, well, I won't say perfectly ranked, because we have a ranked list, it helps them plan kind of across when we can do, you know, some of the data changes are a little slower. The ETL jobs tend to be a little slower than some of the front end stuff, and so it really helped us just kind of lay it all out and plan it better. A better view of doneness. So again, that kind of ties really tight into planning across all those teams. We had what we called the 3 levels of doneness, because there were typically the 3 teams that touched any one change. And so there'd always be a race, and someone would yell, it's done, and then, oh, but the ETL job's not done, and it's done, oh, but the data cube's not there. So really this kind of helped us get a real view of what is done and linking those things back to the stories. And then we're running on real-time, you know, real live data, which is not only for reporting purposes, status for the team, which is not only great for the team, but also meant that it really cut down on how much time the team spent doing reporting. So because well, at first we were on the wall, which allowed kind of walk around status by the management. But again, the distributed team, that didn't help. So once we got into the tool, we found that there were a lot less spreadsheets to manage. They were doing some reports in PowerPoint. Those went out the door, and the individual developers really didn't have to talk about status anymore or build status reports. It was just kind of in the tool. They moved their work items and stories through, and the tool just kind of spit out the report. So they were able to really get rid of the creation of reports, you know, as they were doing. So here's the numbers. So like I said, they were really good because they had all these metrics about themselves before we started, which, to be honest, in the agile transformation work I've done in the past is usually not the case. Usually people just have a gut feel they're not doing a very good job. They don't take the metrics and say, hey, we want to be, you know, this much better. But these guys really did a lot. They are heavy in business analytics in general. So what we did was, so again, in the kind of method of the madness, the workload, right? So we were able to take on a lot more workload. We had this big prioritized thing, you know, backlog, and by putting it into a system tool, we're able to manage, right? So when these stats are all, how many did I do? 3 releases, so for us 9 sprints. So across the first 9 sprints, we found that we ended up with 3,000 work items. So managing those across multiple walls, across multiple cities would have been madness. I'd say impossible. You know, at any given time, there's about 200 to 225 active work items in there. When we say work items, that's in Epic. That covers Epic, story, defects, and tasks. So everything that we plan. There's 225 things, let's say, on the plan or the roadmap. So improvement in concurrent development. So because they didn't have anything to organize all those tasks before, they would only run in basically what they call 2 streams. So basically they could handle 2 changes at a time because they had 2 teams, and that was it. So they, like I said, they would get something in, whatever the prioritization method was, they would box it up, they'd get a budget, and they'd go off and do it, and we didn't want to hear about anything else until we were done. That's how that worked. And some things were as short as a few days, some as long as a couple of months, but only one thing at a time. And they moved to 6 streams across 4 teams. So they were able to take the 2 big teams and split them, and then we were able to run 6 streams, because we found some changes, like I said, because we have all those different bits, some changes, there were some inefficiencies. So I might do, be able to write at the front of the report really fast, and then I got to wait for a detailed job. Well, then I can kind of move over to one of the other streams and kind of help out until I see that the guys following have popped up, their sprints caught up to me, and I can move back over. So because all of that data is visualized now, they can really kind of work across these streams, which is really kind of loosened or lowered the level of let's say just madness, the level of like stress that a lot of these guys have. So they're able to triple productivity and double complexity, and what that means in their language is we decided for productivity we would count the feature changes or the actual changes. So they say that they're 5 times faster by looking at points. I know that we fundamentally changed how they estimated things by points, so they're not comparing like to like, but they'll tell you they're delivering 5 times the amount of points that they were delivering before. In reality, they're putting out 3 times the amount of changes they were. So they are handling about 3 times the amount of changes. And the complexity is that, so while if you have the budget and the political capital, you get moved to the top, and then whenever there was kind of, let's say capability state, there was kind of capacity, the team tended to pick off what was easy. That was kind of what they added in as a filler. So now since they've prioritized and we have it kind of laid out right, they've noticed that the amount of the complexity they're doing, so that they have this concept of a complexity point to things, and the complexity points have gone up. So they are doing kind of what the business wants opposed to what's easiest, which I think, again, when you're in a high stress environment and people are pushing on you, and then there's a little bit of capacity, you just grab what's easiest. So that cultural change really helped with that. So they got rid of it. We estimated when we came in, each guy was spending about 4 hours a week pulling all his reports together. And then there was a whole, what they call FTE, like a full-time employee, who just then grabbed all of those things and built this PowerPoint/spreadsheet magnificent, thing that was status of these different 2 projects that were running, or 2 streams that were running. So now with dashboarding and things like that, they just got rid of that person altogether, and the guys they don't spend any time like what they would call noticeable time. They move their tasks around, but they feel like that's part of their work, so they don't actually report their status. So this is what like a task board looks like. This is like a really simple sprint. So there's a change that's going in for control M trillion. That's the story. That was kind of a plan. That's kind of a big planned thing. There was a set of changes, right? I didn't know how much info to be able to show or not, but it's a set of changes. And then here are the underlying tasks, and those were all assigned to different teams, but we can see them all together. So we can see that in the resolved or in the finished, we've just essentially loaded the data we need, and all the stats are changed. We're in the middle of making the actual code change, and then we'll do cutover, which is what they call deployment. So we'll actually do the deployment and watch it happen, and that's still open, right? So that's kind of how we can watch. We can actually cut down and look into each sprint, and we'll have, like I said, we now have kind of 6 sprints running at the same time. Oh, sure.
You had your backlog in Excel, but this is
No, we have our backlog in the tool also. So we're IBM. I would say so. The tool we're using and the client bot is Rational Team Concert. So we imported the spreadsheet version into the tool. For the first several sprints, what we did was do it in spreadsheets in the meeting and import it. We have slowly moved away from the spreadsheet and now do screen share and just put everything directly into the tool and prioritizing the tool. What's that? Yeah, just because it seemed like double work to be loading, and so if we can type it once, right? Well, I mean, I guess we typed it once and then we would do an upload. It just yeah, we're just trying to move all the way into the tool. The less copies of things, right, the less versions of the truth there are out there, the better we found. So that's what we're doing on the tool. This is kind of, if we blew it out into a project plan view, this is kind of what it looks like. So we can obviously have dates and dependencies and different constraint types. So the tool allows them to still export and import from Microsoft Project. There are still 2 of the stream leaders that are PMP certified, and they will use Microsoft Project. So at the end, we just, just whatever. So just use it. The tool imports and exports from it. So for us on the ground, it doesn't really matter if they're constantly pulling it out in Project or not. So it lays over in here. This is kind of, so right in the middle, kind of, you can kind of see there was some of the Scrum from the some of the sprint that was shown just before. But these are work items across all the sprints. So we can kind of see how all the sprints come together so the PMO feels better that this is very much what they're used to, right? So all the sprints kind of pump back into this big roadmap, which right, they would call it.
Sorry, do you feel you had to do this level of 3 different levels of stuff just to get it through, because it's a big organisation and had to get through the levels of politicalness?
I'll say that it didn't hurt to be this structured, to go through the politicalness. But when you are staring down at a spreadsheet of 3,000 lines, a bit of structure really helps too. So the reality of prioritizing 3,000 lines, I think, is total BS. No one will do it efficiently. So we start by just lopping off some of it. That we try to go through and push everything that's low priority. Of course, in the old version of IT, the business doesn't want to call anything low priority because they consider that never be built. So we started with 3,000, we ended up with 2,999 after that one. So by grouping these and kind of that gives us a little easier time. I think that I personally feel like I need that structure just to get my head around what it is to do this many things.
So he's doing this level on top of the other level, and that's pandering to the senior management. Like, why can't they use the tool that everyone else is using and have everyone on the same page?
Because we live in the real world.
Yeah. Is it pandering? It is pandering at some extent, yes. I like, personally, about this tool, and I don't sell this tool, but personally about this tool, I like that it allows me to pander without a whole lot of overhead. So if you want to import, you want to export in Project, update it, and then re-import, and have all your changes show up here. And to me, that seems like a whole lot of work when this has similar functionality, and you could have came in here and you could have changed the status in here, and you could have reassigned it to a new person in here if you wanted. I don't care how you interact with it, as long as you're doing it actively, and as long as it's happening in the time frame daily that we need it. But you're right, it's some pandering. The PMOs are run by PMP certified. Not that that's bad for everyone that's PMP certified, but I mean, there are structures and a whole level. I guess when we go in to try to fix a very specific problem for a very specific team, it's a bit of how much do you want to boil the ocean? Do I want to try to change the whole client, or do I want to get some real wins on the board with his team? So, yeah.
Would you imagine anyone outside the PMO could use this view?
I don't know, to be honest. To use this view, probably not, and I'll show you why. The tool cuts it up by it has the my concept, so just showing me my stuff and things I'm attached to and things like that. So I find that most of the developers stay in those my views. I think the PMO is probably who uses this massive overview.
I run the PMO.
You find this useless? Well, I appreciate that from a PMO. I think it's a whole lot of. Listen, it's all data in the database, at a technical level. So if you want to view it this way, view it this way. If not, I recommend. I like that. So this is kind of the concept of dashboards that we put in. So this is for a particular project. And so we can kind of see along the left, it's kind of the all, so we can kind of see how we're working. That's across all the sprints. We can see the open to-dos across the whole team. You know, I of course had to cut all their names. And then this is these are the my views I was talking about, right? So this is one that we give everyone on the team out of the box. You can see by the tabs that they can go by and make. There's a whole bunch of widgets, so they can do what they want, but we try to give people a concept of like, this is what's possible. We find this very useful. Most people will build out a whole bunch of extra, the techies as they get familiar will build out a whole bunch of the rest of the stuff, and they'll just use these my views, right? It's mostly, if we can decompose things down to that level, it's mostly important that they know what they need to do. And if we've got the Scrum Master, we do use the concept of Scrum Master, and if we've got the Scrum Master and we use a concept of like leads, so tech leads and kind of VA leads. So if we got them all in a Scrum kind of planning things and making sure they just drop into the my views, then the world starts to kind of turn pretty nicely. And this is kind of what a status report looks like now. So, and again, this just feeds in. So this they can see for the May release there. We can see kind of how things are tracking, what are planned. Usually we put some additional ones that are lists of things that are going in, like lists of changes. I just screen cut those out altogether because there were so many words in there that were client specific. It was like a CIA redacted thing at the end, so I just got rid of it all. But in general, there would also be some lists of the high level, all the high level, like the names of the changes that they know are going in for particular audits or particular report changes. So that way, going into the release, anyone from the business can get this view. So going into the release, they can see if their change is in the release or it's been removed or if it's running late. They can see it by the name they know it of, right? So the name of the report and the change, dash the change. That's really it. So I mean, that's kind of what we did there. We're like I said, we're about 18 months in now. Things are running pretty nicely. And this is something I find kind of common is that they're dropping more and more of the ceremony around Scrum and even the time boxing. And since they are a business as usual group, they're not doing a ton of new development and custom. They're getting very lean. They're just prioritizing, pulling the next thing in, keeping the work in progress limited to one change per stream, so 6 changes happening at a time. And they're getting into a good pace. We still do these quarterly releases because some of the big data warehouse changes happen quarterly, and that just is how the organization works. And we usually take 2 days at the end of, or right at the beginning of the next quarter to look back on the last quarter and think about what it is we could do differently. And something that's a personal thing I always do on retrospective is, yes, we can change the world, especially in a really big one. We can think of, in a quarterly retrospective, we can think of a lot of things to change. But at the end of the day, I want to prioritize the list out of my retrospective so that we can do one thing, and that one thing basically goes on the backlog as that one change is going to happen over the next quarter. So if some other changes happen, we find some capacity, it happens, sure, we'll dig into that retrospective list. But I want one change every quarter because then we're aggressively, or at least actively, changing ourselves. And marketing pays for me to be here, so there's my obligatory marketing slide. IBM is running a Innovate conference, and we'll have streams about agile, cloud, architecture. So you can go to that link. I think there's one in Melbourne and one in Sydney. So anything else about change or what we're doing? This is kind of the second client in Sydney that I've done something very similar. So what I would call lean more than Scrum for BAU, business as usual, IT, not a whole lot of new stuff, just change and fix going through. Just kind of building a nice lean pipeline where things kind of flow through and everyone's on the same page.
Were they rational customers in many other parts of their business? Were they using Rose and other components of that? IBM, heavy in terms of the
is this customer? Yeah. So this customer is well, for the BI stuff, they're mixed. They do use Cognos and Business Objects, so which are competitor tools, but they have both in-house. They are a bit of an IBM customer, not a huge IBM customer in Australia, but they are a bit of an IBM customer. They also use, I don't think anyone uses Rose anymore. I don't think that's a thing, but yeah, I'm trying to think. Sorry, they use. So this is Team Concert. They use the Requirements Composer tool. So I guess if we link some requirements over. Sure. Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure they have some other IBM kit.
Did they have other existing tools around, say, defect test management, that kind of thing? Like, say, we typically see, HD quality.
Yep. Yeah, they have Quality Center. Yeah. So. At first, we did not do integration with Quality Center, mostly because those teams didn't want to, so we didn't. Eventually, someone from some IT governance came down and said, hey, why are there defects also in here? So now there's a linking that goes on between them. No data replication, but there's a linking that says we're working in our dev space on something that's responding to this known defect in Quality Center. Yeah. So they have that. They have some Jira in-house that we linked to for a while, but mostly has been moved off of now. That was most of the tools. And then most of the rest of the tools this team are like very specific to the individuals, right? So like the data warehouse has its own group of tools, and every guy I look at uses some different SQL parser and writing tool. So yeah, all that kind of stuff.